I just returned with a number of your students and leaders from a magical country called Jamaica. That's why I'm tan. This is not real. This is Jamaica sun. It's a whole different kind of tan, to tell you the truth, because the sun is completely different there. But we had an amazing time. I saw God, especially through our students. I would say as a faith family, we should be proud of every single one of them and our leaders. They not only represented our community, but through them, I actually saw God moving and working. But we had perplexing and challenging times. Actually, in your songbooks, you'll see our whole group there. If you go to the back, there's a picture of the whole group. I think there were 34 of us. And it was from our church and First Lutheran in Columbia Heights. We joined together to go down to Jamaica. And when we got there, it was in Montego Bay. It's in a mission called Youth with a Mission. It's been around for 50 years. And it's an incredible ministry that goes on there. They actually broke us up into work sites. And what we did is we were challenged to get outside of our comfort zones. And it really did. But the people of Jamaica they're incredible. A beautiful people. And ones that love Jesus. Well, one of the work sites, there was so much where I saw God. But one of the work sites, actually, that's what I want to focus on tonight. It was a place that, it's a children's home. It's a place called West Haven. And our van, to actually get there from Montego Bay, the roads are just sketchy. You're talking like gravel everywhere. They don't have systems like we do. And our driver would go as fast as humanly possible, 3 inches from the vehicle in front of him, and go as quickly as we could get to the home. And then all at once he'd slam on his brakes because the roads were just so terrible. So you just maneuver over them to not destroy the van and then just go as quickly as you could. When we maneuvered through there, we got to the home, and it's gated to keep the residents inside, to keep them safe. And as we got there, there were people with their faces pressed to the bars. And you could see the excitement as soon as the van poured up. They looked and they shouted and they started running to tell the others. It was just rejoicing. That's what it was. It was joy. It was like the best people had ever come. And I'm like, that's us, guys. It was fun. It was such a welcoming. And we got inside our work group and we piled out. And these are people, these are children aged 3 through, almost 40. They had extreme things that were going on with them. And the leader helped us and said, I'm going to have you go into the cottages where they stay. And I want you just to help out. Come in and say, what do you need? And then to listen and go show them God's love. And so that's what we did. And we'd go in and we were confronted and challenged by some challenging things. People, adults that, they needed changing. People that also were wearing, they'd wear pants, but the pants didn't fit them. They'd been donated, and they didn't have belts, so they would have like bed sheets that they had tied around just to keep them clothed. And people that just stay in their beds all day long because they can't walk, can't hardly talk. And the people themselves, they, at first glance, there were some that were so cute and so beautiful, and others that, they were beautiful but in a different way. Well, one of them, his name is Frankie. And Frankie would come up to you, and he'd come up. And I'm going to get really close to you, by the way. He wouldn't warn you, though. He'd come up to you, and he'd say, be good. Be good. And then he'd come up to someone else. This is going to be really uncomfortable, by the way. Be good. And then he'd walk around, and then some other kid would be there, and he'd knock them down, and then he'd say, be good. And then he'd walk around, and then someone else would be eating, and he'd take their food and start just eating it as much as possible in between mouthfuls. He'd say, be good. And he'd just be eating. And then he'd also get right in your grill, and he'd kiss you. You're welcome that I didn't kiss you, maybe later. And, it was challenging. He got in your face, and he was doing things that didn't seem good, and then he challenged you to be good. I was like, what's going on, Frankie? But he had that way, that loving way, just getting in your heart. It was amazing. I looked forward to that time. I looked forward to actually getting outside of my comfort zone. I'm not used to that. He was beautiful. Well, Frankie was there, and yet one of the other residents right in the same cottage, his name was Kelvin. Well, Kelvin is also an adult. He's probably almost close to 40. His arms are shriveled. Couldn't hardly use them. His legs atrophied, twisted. Couldn't walk. And he laid in bed the whole day. Now, they would get him up sometimes to feed him, and to feed him meant to give him a bottle of porridge. And you'd just pour it in, and you'd wait for him to swallow, and then you'd pour more in, and wait some more. As I saw Kelvin, my heart just kind of broke a little bit. To see someone, what's his quality of life? And they said, Pastor Dan, can you feed him? And I said, absolutely. And I took the bottle and I tried to feed him, but Kelvin kept turning away. And so he would turn his head, and so I'd march around and say, okay, Kelvin, here's more food. And then he'd turn his head the other way, and I'd say, Kelvin, come on, quit messing with me. And then he'd get a little smile. I'm like, is he messing with me? Or is it that he isn't hungry? Or is it that he doesn't like it? Or is it that he doesn't like me, which isn't possible, of course. But what is it? Is it because I'm bald? Is it because I'm really, I'm loud, I think, actually. Is that why? Did my voice bother him? I started to ask all these questions. I was just wondering. I'm just trying to take care of him. I'm talking to him, and he's not communicating. It was frustrating. Until Linda Bartholomew came over, and I saw God through you, Linda. I was perplexed. I was challenged, and Linda comes right up to him, uncomfortably close, gets right up to him, and she touched his cheek like this. And she said, hey, Kelvin. And Kelvin looked at her, and he got the biggest smile. And guess who ate from Linda? Kelvin did. I promptly gave that bottle over to her. I said, nice job. It was beautiful. But here it is. You have people like Kelvin in one group that need constant care, that even need to be spoon-fed, literally fed. And then you have people like Frankie who would come up to you and say things like, feed me. And I'd say, Frankie, come on, you can eat yourself. And he'd say, no. And I'd say, yes, you can. He said, feed me. And I said, no. He's like this. And then he'd feed himself. And he'd say, now feed me. I'm like, nice try, Frankie, you know. And then he'd say, be good. And then he'd eat some more. You have people like Frankie that would say, be good, could kind of do some things like eat and take care of themselves in some ways, but needed guidance. But he didn't know it. It was hard. Now, Jesus, as he is speaking, crowds are coming to him, and there's two groups of people. And I think they're very similar to what we were encountering at West Haven. There were two groups. One is a group of people that thinks they have it all together. They can take care of themselves. They're the ones that others would look up to. They dress the part. They were the ones that would come to synagogue, and they were looking like polished and professional. They were the Pharisees and the scribes. They were the ones that others looked to see, are they right with God? And then there's the other group of people that others didn't think were beautiful at first. They were the ones that, they messed up. Maybe they didn't look like the ones that others could take care of and maybe couldn't. There's even a special class of sinners, we're told here in this group, called tax collectors, who everyone hated. And these are the two groups of people that are coming to Jesus. Now, Jesus, knowing this, sees these two groups that are so different from each other, and he does what any really great speaker does. He relates to them. And now, if Jesus were speaking to our day in parables, that's what he's spoken and taught in, these stories with some kind of major lesson to try to glean from, he wouldn't say, he's like, they know shepherds. They may not be shepherds themselves, but they know shepherds, and they know that lifestyle because it was such a huge thing in their economy. So he says, well, imagine you lost a sheep. And then he tells them about that you do everything you could to find that sheep. He's like, and if that doesn't connect with you, well, what about if imagine you're a woman who had 10 coins and lost one, and you're going to do everything you can to find that lost coin. So he relates to them saying, hey, you're going to find what is lost. Now, if he was speaking today, he wouldn't say like, well, pretend you're a shepherd. I don't know if Jesus spoke like that. I don't think he did, but pretend you're a shepherd. Well, that doesn't relate to us. He'd probably speak like the parable of the lost iPhone. Now, I don't know about you, but in the Dornfeld household, this happens semi-regularly. Usually it's my wife a couple times a week. She's like, Dan, can you call my phone? I know it's in the house somewhere. And I make this great show. I have to dial. Where could it be? Now, he'd speak about that, right? Because that's happened to us, or our lost keys or something. But for people back then, these two groups that maybe didn't relate to a lot, they could relate to losing something that's valuable. But Jesus does something really amazing. He relates it to them, and he says, you know what the lost coin is? You know what the lost sheep? You know what the lost iPhone is? He says the lost, it's actually, well, it's a special group of people that the rest of you look down on. Now, this is perplexing, because God was only for the best of the best, right? Those who follow the laws and break them once in a while, but they're mainly good people, and others could respect them and look up to them like Pharisees. But that's not what Jesus says. He says, you know what? You want to know about a party? The biggest party happens when the lost coin or the lost sheep happens, and that party isn't anywhere, it's in heaven. And it's led not just by anyone, but the angels that God has. That's the party that goes on. And you know who the lost coin and the lost sheep are? Well, it's sinners. Sinners that don't have everything together. And you know who they are? Well, I'd like you to look in that songbook again. There were some pictures there. One's of Frankie and a couple students. Who's the lost coin? Well, sure, it's Frankie. But it's those students too. Who's the lost sheep? You see all those good-looking people in their nice Mission Jamaica t-shirts smiling away, the ones that represented us? Well, it's them. And it's you too. No, I don't know what's gone on in your lives. I don't know what's going on right now. But I know this. God is desperate to reach out to you, to show you how much he loves you. Now, for years, we've had incredible songs that we lift up to God, and one of the most treasured ones is Amazing Grace. Now, Amazing Grace, they estimate, actually, that it was sung last year in the U.S. alone 55 million times. Amazing Grace. 55 million. Someone counted. I think they estimated, actually. That's a lot of counting. 55 million times. Why would such a song connect with us? Well, because we know deep down, as much as we try to portray it to others, how perfect we are and how we have all things in our lives put together, that we don't. That song speaks that truth to me, and I'll bet it does to you too. What you may not know is that song was written by John Newton hundreds of years ago, and John Newton was one of those guys that would have been in this special group of sinners, the one that needed special attention and others looked down on. You see, John Newton, he had decided that life is not, it wasn't worth living too much. Now, his mom had taught him about the Bible, taught him about God, but she died when he was 7, and so he went into his father's trade, into the Navy, and he was kicked out because, well, he was doing stupid stuff. I'm sure none of you can relate to ever doing anything challenging or difficult that your parents look down upon in your life, right? How come parents are looking at their kids right now with a smile? Well, John Newton did that enough that he was ousted, and so he found himself on a slave ship, and he was serving there, and he still did not so great things, enough that he'd be lashed to a pole and flogged. But he didn't believe in God. All he thought is, I'm going to do as much as I can to enjoy life, to live it to the fullest, and to make sure others do too. There's no God, and I'm just going to do this thing called life. until one night he was on the ship, it was in the middle of the ocean, and a huge storm came up, and it was so much that John Newton, he prayed for the first time. And he didn't know he was praying to. He didn't even believe if there was a God there, but he said, if you're there, God, please save me. Save us. And the storm was rocking the ship so much that seasoned sailors were terrified. They didn't know if they were actually going to survive it. And the storm battered it so much that a hole came into the hull. Water is pouring in, and he prayed even harder. And as he did, the storm shifted the boat, and the cargo that was in the hold actually moved right and covered the hole. And the ship was saved. And John Newton, who hadn't believed in God, he penned these words, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see." Now, I'd love to tell you that after making that song that so many of us just treasure, the one that we heard at our parents' or our grandparents' or our spouse's funeral, the one that many of us, I think, hope for our own too, because it speaks to us that deeply. I'd love to say after that his life was perfect. He followed Jesus. He didn't have anything wrong. He had no doubts, but that's not the case. He still did not so great things. But the truth he had glimpsed kept working on him. Ultimately, it changed him. And it reminds me how easy it is to encounter God and then to have doubts. If you're feeling that way today, if you're feeling lost in any way, what are the words that Jesus says? There will be more rejoicing in heaven for you because God's coming. That song is not for somewhere far away. It's not for people just in Jamaica. It's not for just the best of the best. It's for you. God loves you so much that he gave everything on the cross for you. So whether today you're feeling in the one group that feels like life is pretty good, and I feel all right, and I feel pretty decent, or if you're in that other group, the one that feels unloved, unlovable, the one that wonders if there is a God, Jesus is calling out to you today. Who's the lost coin? Who's the lost sheep? The next time you look in the mirror, you're seeing who they are, because it's us. Now, we have made faith, just like Frankie would say, we've made it so simple to be what? We've made it to just be about be good. But that's not what it's about. It's about recognizing that we are lost and we need to be spoon-fed the love of Jesus, this free love that he gives us. That's what our church needs to be about. And that's the measuring stick, the barometer that we are going to be about. We're about what? That all may know the good shepherd and have abundant life in his name. That's what our worship about, our service is about. That's what everything needs to be about, not only here, but especially out there. There are close to 30,000 people, and you may even be one of them, that feels like they don't have a connection with God, that they feel lost, right in Moorhead. It is time to go out, to know that Jesus has called us and is free, but now it's time to go out and be there with them. So I'd ask for your prayers and your partnership to go and be the hands and feet of Jesus. To help people realize that the grace of God, this amazing grace, is for them too. So be good. Not because you're earning it, because the lost need our God. Amen.